All right. And hold on one second. I need to go and I need to click something real fast on Instagram to put us live on Instagram. Here it is. All right. Okay. Half a day todos Samsugwana Hudzung. Estigyo Nuevo episode Fanatsu. We have a lot to talk about today, but before we get started, before you have to listen to my voice, we have a voice that I want you to listen to, which is mas bali mas importante, mas menhalum kinu idzoku. And so we are talking about Chamorro self-determination, and one of the most important people that you want to listen to about Chamorro self-determination is, of course, former member of Congress, former UOG president, educator, activist, Familian Cuetu, and Cabeza. Oh my goodness, that is the greatest Chamorro resume ever. Robert Underwood. And so I want to give him a chance to talk to us and share some thoughts, especially in light of a hearing that is coming up, a public hearing about a bill which would eliminate Chamorro self-determination in a plebiscite, decolonization plebiscite for Guam. I want to give Senor Underwood a chance to share his thoughts before we get this episode started officially. Senor, i-Zoom, i-Pisun Zoom, i-Zomu, por favor.
I-Pisun Zoom. Si Dios Mase, no, Miguel, no, buenas días, buenas tardes, todos hamzo. Na mago 15 na okasyon, kasi kisinyan mandanya datasangan pinitita, put ikinalamte ni Mantautauta, Manautauta, ni Mansamoro district, at maman na tiempo. Pues kaigi si Miguel gimenanetsu no finatablero panogi. Como repara, hati mangaigi, hati gumuguti ito. Kundi uno si Hope Cristobo, si Maria Tihan, si BJ Cruz, dan si Narissa Underwood. Sangan na, no, this the upamam na tiempo hagasa, no, in patikis timona. You know, we're on the precipice of something that is dramatically significant. Yet another attempt to deny the Chamorro people the right to make their own choice about their political future as an entity and as a people. One of the great things that always strikes me about people who come to this issue late and who come to this issue as a new issue is this issue is a lot older than all of us. And it goes back to a period of colonization. Our main struggle is to decolonize. Our main struggle is not just to make our lives incrementally better or to live more fruitful lives on a personal level. Our main concern is to decolonize the situation that we've been in since the arrival of Spanish missionaries. So as we go through that process, we must remember that we've had many different people deny, first of all, that the Chamorro people exist. Then once we got over that hump and we were able to get that across, then now we have to figure out what their political rights are. So this is a struggle. This bill is the latest challenge. There were other challenges, but we have to make sure that as we struggle on with this, that we don't personalize it. This is not about individuals who are seeking to deny our rights. This is about us trying to affirm our rights. And so let's keep that struggle going. You have many things to add. You have many people that are involved in this. The field, and I have to say that, I first went to the United Nations to articulate this back in 1982. It was a very lonely feeling because there weren't too many people who understood what we were trying to do in OPIR. But today the field is wider, it's deeper, it's smarter, it's more astute, and I'm counting all of you to do much, much more. And so, Viva Mansamoro, Viva Tautotono.
Viva! Si Zeus Masi, senor. Si Zeus Masi.
Sawa lo que na be fangago dispensasyon di na isinyaw continua timona lo gua otro no para betogi pa mo. So men importante lo you know, a struggle is defined not just by action. A struggle is defined by holding on to principles. What I think these opponents don't understand is that the principle of self-determination is deeply held. It's not just another idea. It's not just about another Fanizakan or another dance or another let's cheer on the tomorrow people. This is the most fundamental principle that we hold on to. Let anybody who runs for political office be aware. Just be aware. You're standing on the precipice of generating yet another mass movement. And so maybe you're helping us along, but just be aware. Si Diyos mase todos ang struggle is defined by
Si Diyos mase. Ooh. No, Hungan, Si Diyos mase. And that was a great introduction to this, the issue of Chamorro self-determination. And I put out a call for people to come and to share their thoughts about this issue, but also in particular this issue of Bill 242-38. And I do like what Senor Underwood shared with us, that issue of focus on the issue of Chamorro self-determination, not necessarily some of the politicians involved, right? Because there's larger issues at play. And I think that that's a good thing for us to think about here. Before we get into some of these issues here, I want to give everyone a chance to introduce themselves, because some of this issue can be contentious. Some people feel very strongly about it in supporting it. Some people feel very strongly opposing it. I mean, hey, I'm somebody who gets regular sort of hate messages, hate comments, all sorts of stuff like that. About this and other issues. And so I know that there's a lot of people who feel that the Chamorro people don't deserve anything. They don't deserve the right to vote. They don't deserve land. They don't deserve the food stamps that everyone's addicted to and stuff like that. And there's a lot of sort of terrible rhetoric that people have about this. And so I appreciate all of you coming and being willing to talk about this and share about this, because for some people, they can bring a lot of the history that we are trying to kind of push back and fight back against into what they feel about it, whether they realize it or not. And so I want to give each of you a chance to introduce yourselves before we get into kind of the issues themselves. And we'll go first and last into the Zoom. And so Elise Hago Finetna, the person with the most social media followers in the Zoom room, put for what?
I do. No way. That is false, senor. I definitely think that, well, first, Sejus Masi for having me. I think that you chose the right guy to give that introduction for this episode. And Ina Anhusi Elise Bias. In some circles, I guess I'm known as Finadani Nani. I was born and raised in Guam, Jigu, Guam. Familia in Vicentico, and currently I live in Washington State. And I've lived out here in Washington State for, oh gosh, since 2010, basically. And one thing that I think back to all the time is that I think, life in Guam, at least for me at that time, I was so focused on succeeding, on leaving, on making something of myself in the American way, like we were kind of conditioned to do during that time, that it wasn't until I moved out to Washington and I met other indigenous tribes out here and I heard their stories and the ways that colonization was impacting their communities through alcoholism, through domestic violence, through things like that, that I finally, reflected on, oh my gosh, that sounds just like our communities in the Marianas. And that's when I, unfortunately and a little embarrassingly, really realized that we are colonized and that we are living in a really difficult cycle of militarization and trauma and continued rejection of our rights. And so I'm just really happy to be here, and I encourage more people to kind of understand more about colonization in general. And like Senor Underwood was saying, that it's not just an ideal or a fad or something that we're, you know, trying to make popular. It's a real thing and it has real implications on everybody. And I think we're seeing a lot of that, those symptoms of it arising even more so today. So, just Masi again.
Hoguma Sidzus Masi. Lisa, and I can't remember who was in the Zoom next. Brianna, was it you in the Zoom? I think it might have been you. And we're going furthest away from the Mariana. So time zone. We're going now time zone slingshot. And so I think you might be the furthest away time zone wise. So up the latest to attend this podcast. And so Brianna, put favor, introducing my sahau.
Sejus Masi for having me. Thank you. Hafade Torotamzu Guahusi Brianna, Familia Tugong. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me on this really important conversation. My name is Brianna. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio, so very far away. It's nearly my bedtime. Just, you know, when I saw the call out for this episode, it just really resonated with me in the work that I do. I run a nonprofit here in the tri-state area here in Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky, serving the very broad interests and needs of our Indigenous and Native communities out here. And yeah, again, just incredibly grateful to be here and be able to use my voice and be able to speak to, you know, what our community is facing and be able to lend my voice to that is just an incredible privilege. So, Jijus Masi for being here. Thank you.
Hagumas, Sidus Masi, and because I know it is a little bit later for you, Mas Puengi para Hogu, and so Sidus Masi, and Ali para Hogu, and I appreciate your couch, Ali. It reminds me, I feel like I'm visiting my oldest auntie. I appreciate your couch. It's definitely giving me taking my grandmother to visit her mother's remaining living sister vibes. Sidus Masi.
This is Mossy for having me. I'm actually at my grandparents' house. This couch, I'm pretty sure, is older than I am. Hafade Todes Hamsu, Guahusi Aliana Barrera, Familian Batulu, Talit Zen Alawit. I was born in Virginia to military parents, but I came back to Guahan when I was one, and I was raised by my grandparents. Right now, I am a student at UOG studying fine arts and Tumoru studies. And yeah, I really started to get activated around late last year with my Intro to Tumoru Studies class. But uh, but going to UOG only just really explained things that I had already been noticing in high school, the unfair treatment of Guam by the US. So yeah, it's just lost.
Oh, Hogumas. Sidus Masi. And just to get us started, for those of you that are unfamiliar with Bill 242-38, and so if you are, you know, there has been for a few decades now this issue of a plebiscite for Guam, the quest for self-determination, the quest for decolonization, and at the core of it has been this idea, which is that there is a vote for a plebiscite, a vote in which the Chamorro people, sometimes in law they've been referred to as the native inhabitants, but the idea being that those who have been wronged the most through colonization, those who have been silenced, marginalized, who have been ignored, that they are given a formal process in which they get to express what they want. And this is an internationally recognized right. And this, even in the law, has been non-binding, but it has been something which federal courts have said in the past that it is unconstitutional. And so it has led to different debates, different problems. The movement for decolonization has stalled at different points. Some of you might be familiar with the Davis case. You know, oh, we shouldn't say his name because like Voldemort, he will appear. Oh no, I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't say his name. But and so this is an issue though, which And so I'm going to put into the, once we move on with the discussion, I'm going to put in the chat a link for a petition that Independent Guahan has been circulating. I'm also going to put a link for a toolkit, resources for those of you from the Commission on Decolonization who want to talk about this with your family, with your friends, because this can be a difficult issue to talk about. Because on the one hand, you have America, which is coming up on its 250th birthday, and it seems like it's the biggest, greatest country in the world, and America says, let everyone vote. You don't get anything unless you let everyone vote. But on the other hand, you have over here, he says, is that justice? Is that right for the Chamorro people? Is that right for Guahan? Is that right for us? And Senator Will Parkinson, who has proposed this bill, says that this is the only way to move forward on decolonization is if you do what the federal government says, what the courts have said. And so that's why this can be a tough issue to discuss. And that's why I appreciate the three of you who are here to share your thoughts on it, because I think for me, one of the most important things is that we do talk about it and we don't leave it up for the abstract thoughts of America's the greatest country in the world. So if America says equality and everyone votes, that's it. I mean, have you looked at America lately? I mean, America's got a lot of weird Botox stuff going on, not to mention a lot of weird stuff in the drinking water. And America's got a data center right in the middle of its brain. I don't know what's going on with America lately. They should really get that looked at. And so let's hear from all of you. Let's get some initial thoughts. And so who wants to go first? We don't have to go in the order of your introductions, but I want to hear some initial thoughts. Now, remember, this is not a scholarly conversation. It's not an activist conversation, because when we think about our community Chamorros, but also when we think about Guahan and those connected to Guahan, a lot are non-Chamorro too. And so when we're thinking in general about that, you don't have to take it, you can take it in a scholarly way. It doesn't have to be in a scholarly way. Who wants to kind of share first? Brianna, put for what?
Yeah, I'm a little nervous, so I'm going to jump in because I have a lot. I will share that I unfortunately only learned about Guam versus Davis a short time ago, actually, in Julian Uggen's wonderful essay, where he discusses this and speaks so fluently about the impact of this case and others and the future of this decision. And I, as a Chamorro woman living in Ohio and having lived in Ohio my whole life, I read that and I was like, oh, I couldn't imagine that something like this particular bill would be introduced anytime soon after having so recently learned about this and sort of understanding the history of our people and the various federal legislation and things that have happened to our people over our history. But what my initial thought of after reading this bill, and I read it actually multiple times to just familiarize myself with it. And what I found interesting was that there was almost an entire page of just ways in which Senator Parkinson was sharing how he stands with the Chamorro people. Like, he stands with our people and he agrees that our pursuit of self-determination and sovereignty, that he stands with that and believes in that. However, he continues to say, but we need to continue to use these mechanisms, these principles, the Constitution, to move forward this quest for decolonization, and therefore continuing all the while stating, yes, we believe in the Chamorro, self-determination and decolonization. However, we need to continue to use the tools of colonization in order to get us there. And so, that was one of the initial reactions that I had, was just, this wasn't a necessarily particularly confusing piece of proposed legislation. I felt it was very easy to be read, but one that I thought could really attract attract a large group of people to feel included, in what he is attempting to push forward. And so I think in that way, we really have to like pick apart and understand what's at stake. But I think, also, and I have this in front of me, like something that felt particularly jarring to see is just sort of like under the various sections where like native inhabitants is crossed out entirely. And so we're like reading this like physical piece of paper where like, native inhabitants is just scratched over. And, I think I'll leave it at that, but just to like share two pieces of initial response and feedback. I think it's interesting, and I think it's problematic that he suggests and communicates that he is for our pursuit of decolonization, while sort of stating that we need to remain inside the box of the colonizers' tools. Like we need to use the colonizers' tools to achieve that. So I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
No, Sidus Masi. No, Sidus Masi. Thank you for sharing that. Because I mean, and Ali, if you wanted to share next, because one of the things that some people may not be familiar with is that leading up to the introduction of this bill was, I think there may have been 5 town halls that Senator Parkinson held here in Guam talking about political status issues. I think I attended 4 of them. And they had, different villages, different community centers. And what was fascinating to me was the fact that the majority of the voices that I heard that attended these town halls did not align with the bills that were introduced by Senator Parkinson. Most of the voices or what Senator Parkinson communicated, kind of, but he has his personal opinions and so on. But that, at least from what the community was telling him about what they felt about the future of the island, it didn't reflect that in what he heard in those town halls. And so, in the town halls, people definitely seem to feel like this is not the way to do it, that you should protect the right to Chamorro self-determination. And he seemed to feel strongly that he supports the Chamorro people, but this is the only way that he seems to think that you could ever move ahead. And so, Ali, I wanted to hear your thoughts on the bill in general, but also if you feel, because you attended a few of those town halls too, if you wanted to share what it was like at those, because that was the first town hall of those type in a few years.
Yeah. So, yeah, I attended 3 out of 5 town halls. Um, it was, I think, Totu, Malesu, and Samuning. And what surprised me was going out there, whether the crowd was like larger, smaller, like Dr. Bavakwa said, people were generally against letting everyone vote and also making it they well, this doesn't have to really do with it, sort of, yes, but they're also generally in favor of detaching from the US in some sort of way. So when this bill rolled out, I was very confused because it was totally not reflected or reflective of what people had said previously in those town halls. And like to bounce off what Brianna was saying, how he's like, oh, but we have to use the colonizers' tools, to achieve self-determination. I think it kind of in a way proved that using the colonizers' tools doesn't work because we went through this whole formal process, but the people's voices still weren't heard. So a couple of the thoughts that I have about this is that when I would talk to people about it, it was a really rough discussion and it would get kind of heated because they'd end up asking me, well, what else should we do? Because we can no longer have a Chamorro only vote. And then they're like, well, what other way could we do it? And one of the things brought up in the town hall was like a third party vote or changing the date. Um, and obviously it's not ideal, but like there was that option that just wasn't reflected in the bill. Um, and I think people forget, like Dr. Underwood was saying, I think people forget that the principle and the way we go about it also matters. So that's why it was really confusing to me as well, because there were other suggestions that could have been taken into account when writing the bill, but they just also did not show up. Um, Adding on, I think it was kind of disrespectful to kind of just throw it out there because uh, it ended up reading as a kind of like agitating move. Like he just wanted to get people. Uh, I don't want to talk. I know Dr. Underwood said not to talk about the people putting out the bill, but I also just want to talk about, why it doesn't make sense. Because, if the goal ultimately is our like a plebiscite, there are just other ways. And so I think just putting no parameters when he put it out was kind of irresponsible because, and we had this discussion in my class, if we say, oh, everyone can vote and it's just seeing if people want to change our status, then we go to the next vote where we're actually voting. Um, what's to stop people from going, why can't I vote for this when I voted for this? The it sets a precedent, and I think it's important that we take the right step first before moving on. So those were some of my initial thoughts when this came out.
No, Sidus Masi. I think it's a very good point, and that's I think that's been one of the reasons why activists in Robert Underwood's generation before have always held firm on kind of maintain the right of self-determination, maintain because if you do kind of acknowledge your own erasure, because the United States can feel like it can do whatever it wants to you, but for the most part, colonial powers also want to not be the bad guys, and so if you also give them the authority to erase you, it it basically escalates your erasure. So if you give them permission to erase you, it's going to happen. It's almost certainly going to happen faster. So if you basically go and say, yeah, you know what, all of this Chamorro stuff doesn't really matter. You can eat all the Kelaguen you want, and you can call it chicken salad. You can call it whatever you want, and you can sure, you know, you can do whatever you want. You can have the land for your missile bases and all that stuff, whatever. Yeah, and you set the precedent. Imperial powers are always looking for those types of precedents. Rarely is authority or that sort of naked in its aggression. It wants something. And so if you say we're good natives, hey, we acknowledge you have all the power over us. And so we don't really matter anymore. It's like, oh, good. Great. And so that's why, yeah, I'm the last generation of activists was always like, you have to hold on to this because if you tell them you don't matter, then why should they fund your programs for your language and your culture? Then why should the Chamorro Land Trust matter? Because you already told them that your rights don't matter over here or your existence doesn't matter over here. And so, Elise, do you want to your thoughts? Listu how?
Sure, I'd love to. I thank you, Brianna and Ali, for sharing your thoughts also. Ali, I didn't realize that I think it's a very unique perspective where, there's so much that you add to this conversation because you're on the island. And so I also just want to say that what I shared today is my personal perspective of somebody who was born and raised on Guam, who's a Chamorro woman and who lives in the diaspora right now with intent to move back home. And so I have a very unique set of experiences compared to other people. And so everyone will be viewing this through their own lens. But I had to look up a lot of things as well. It was really confusing for me at first to understand this. I'm not a government girly, you know what I mean? Like I had to look up what the word plebiscite meant. Like I was like, what in the world is that? And because initially I was having conflicting feelings. Senor Bevacqua, you're mentioning how our communities, back home, being born and raised in Guam, our communities are very intertwined and very integrated with one another. And I think about my two best friends from high school on Guam. They're not Chamorro. but they were born and raised on the island, and I consider them very much daughters of Guam as well. They consider Guam their home too. And so when this initial conversation was coming up, I was like, well, yeah, of course I'm gonna care about how political status will impact their lives. And of course, I would like them to have a say in that. And then I started to think even more about it. And because they have such a close connection with me, right? They have a close connection with Chamorro, with somebody who is Chamorro. They understand and they know what our people have been through. They understand what has been taken from us as it is. And I don't think that they could bear to take any more. In fact, I truly feel like they would even just see their current life and how their life has flourished on our island as a gift all on its own from our land and from our people. The fact that they have basically benefited in that sense, right, of being able to live on our land and all of that. And in the same regard, I don't feel like I would ever, like if I were to move to where they're from, right? If I were to move to the Philippines or to Palau, I wouldn't feel like I had the right to tell, even if I lived there for generations, I would not feel that I had the right to tell the indigenous people there what to do with their land. And again, that might just be because I have a different perspective on it now that I've moved from home and had, conversations with more indigenous folks and really understood what self-determination is about and how it's we're all just kind of being erased in that sense. The other part that I really think that I have to explain, because the whole rhetoric around Chamorro only vote. So my understanding, and Senor Bevacqua, I'm sure, and you guys might know more about it than I do at this point, but so my understanding is that there is a registry called the Decolonization of Guam Registry, which is basically where people sign up to be part of the plebiscite. And in order to, and the qualifications for this registry, right, in order to sign up to be officially part of the plebiscite, you have to be what the Organic Act refers to as a native inhabitant. If you look at the Organic Act's definition of a native inhabitant, nowhere does it say Chamorro only. And that's where I kept getting so confused, because all it says as a definition of native inhabitant is people who are living on Guam at this time, who are now becoming U.S. citizens through this Organic Act process on 1950, and then their descendants going forward. And so I was really confused, because when I looked up the population of Chamorros on Guam in 1950, it was 45%. So that means only, not even, if we were to consider who could sign up, only 45% of the people there at that time are going to be Chamorro. There's 55% of people who are of non-Chamorro descent who technically could qualify as a native inhabitant. So if you were, a Filipino resident at that time, and you didn't have a political status or tie to the Philippines, and you received U.S. citizenship at 1950, you are a native inhabitant. You would be included in the plebiscite.
No.
So I was so confused, because I just didn't understand. And I think like people are getting caught up on the non-Chamorro, the Chamorro only rhetoric, and thinking like, oh, this is party system, we're not being included. Like, no, you were included in that. I'm sorry, I'm getting really heated now. So
No. And this was part of the frustration in the past, was that the original plebiscite law was based around what the United States had created, because the United States came in and it recognized that these are the colonized people of Guam. And it was primarily Chamorro, but it had a good number of Filipinos. It had a good number of other ethnicities. And so that's why, but the thing though is that in the Davis case, the federal court struck that down, and they said that is unconstitutional. And that's the problem, is that the U.S. court system, the federal courts, they're interested in protecting their own interests, themselves, their own laws. Are they interested in what is right for Guam, what is justice for Guam, what is justice for the Chamorro people? And the late Ed Benavente,
Yeah.
when this was coming up, he had in his office, he had a file of applications for the decolonization registry, which of course the federal court said cannot exist because it violates the Constitution, even though, it should have been allowed to. But he had a folder filled with people who were ethnically non-Chamorro, but were considered to be native inhabitants. These were people who were Filipino, but because they met the definition, and one of them was like a godmother to my grandfather. They were, a family that was here, Filipinos. They were here, but long, before World War II, but they were part of the community,
Yeah.
and so they were recognized. And so it was just using what America had come in, said, you are the people of Guam, this category. And so, but that's part of the issue, is that the United States, does it care about justice? Does it care about making what's right? And so, but this is where we run into problems with what Parkinson is saying. Parkinson is saying, or this bill, excuse me, this bill is saying, well, let's just let everyone vote and then it will fix everything. And then the United States will take seriously our plebiscite. Who thinks that if we held a vote and let everyone vote, then the United States would suddenly start to care what people on Guam think?
Or
I
think that,
don't.
that we had self-respect, right? Like, okay, anybody can vote, anyone, whoever at this point. Like,
No, I don't think that. I mean, even when even if you, there's still tens of millions of people that think that more people watched Kid Rock than Bad Bunny the other day at on Super Bowl day. I don't think America knows what's going on. And so that's why for me, when I hear like, oh, you know what, if we just let everyone vote, then America will take us seriously. Our That comes from the perspective of somebody who has never really talked to representatives of the federal government about anything dealing with the territories or political status. Because everything changes real fast from one administration to the next, from one Congress to the next. And so even if you get one person to say, you know what, if you follow the rules, if you let everyone vote, we'll take you seriously. All it takes is a new speaker, a new president, a new person in the Department of Justice who analyzes this and comes up with an opinion, and suddenly everything changes and it doesn't matter. Okay. Yeah, I'm getting worked up too. Okay, Brianna, go ahead.
Yeah, no, Sijus Masi, at least for all of that, I think, as a Chamorro living on the continent, living in the United States, and, working with tribal nations and indigenous communities here, I echo that sentiment of like, living on stolen land that doesn't belong to me, even though I've lived in Ohio for almost 36 years now. And the really interesting thing about Ohio that I can draw sort of a parallel to is Ohio has no federal or state recognized tribal nations. And so we as like an urban indigenous community who've lived here forever could surely assert our rights or claim to assert our rights as on this land, except the interesting paradigm is that, we as indigenous people, of course, we yield to the requests of the historic tribal nations. This is their homeland, and I would never consider myself an authority or feel as though I had some sort of right over this land that was never my homeland. And I ended up here because, for migration patterns and family, all of that. But, it is something that I've come to understand, working alongside federal tribal nations and within tribal communities here, is just that understanding of sacred tribal homeland and our sacred land as indigenous peoples. And so I just wanted to add that anecdote just alongside and echo what you said, Elise, because I think too, there is, as I was sort of learning about all of this and doing a lot of the similar research, is like it's hard and it's confusing. And I think often that these sort of bills and legislation are intended to confuse us. They're intended to sound like really appealing. And then you're like, wait, well, I gotta read this again because it sounded kind of like he was with us, but I gotta read it again. And then you kind of like can catch up. And I also often think that sometimes things like this often get introduced in moments of chaos where people are already kind of scrambling to figure out this other thing. And then this ends up being a distraction, so that we're not, thinking about this other really important issue that our people are facing. Yeah, and so just wanted to sort of add that alongside what Elise said. I'm definitely fired up and have a lot of additional thoughts, especially as it pertains to sort of this idea, this native inhabitants, and my opinions and thoughts on that. So I do appreciate you saying, of course, anything I share are my own thoughts and my own experience and all of that. So just wanted to mention that as well.
Oh, Sidus Masing. No, Sidus Masing. I think to your point there, this is, I mean, when we look at the world, when we look at the United States, when we look at Guam, this is a time for these types of discussions. But I think that the way that this bill is coming in, it's coming in with the wrong spirit. Because even when and Ali, you attended those town hall meetings, like I did, and one of the things that was brought out at them by Senator Parkinson was really just this idea that he feels that Guam needs to be a state because it's the only way that Guam can survive, and he couched that strongly as military defense, that because of China, because of Russia, North Korea, because of threats in the world, that only as a state will the United States truly defend us, so we should seek statehood. And so it seems that part of why, part of the rationale is that the world is kind of destabilizing, things are changing all around us, and so these bills are coming in to try to kind of push things ahead. But it's, it's, I don't know. When I think about it, and one of the things, if you look at, Underwood was mentioning my virtual background here with this banner, when the Fanogi March happened in 2019, there was more than 2,000 people marching from Adelup, the government complex, to the federal courthouse. And it was this demonstration about kind of retaking this process of decolonization, excuse me, from the federal government, because the courts had held it hostage in our mind with the Davis case for so long. And so we wanted it back. And the pandemic happened soon after. But one of the things that really just I feel unfortunate about looking at this bill and kind of how this is happening is, the people that marched at the front of this demonstration, the Magatautau, sort of the esteemed individuals. These were people who had been fighting for the issue of decolonization for 50 years, 40 years, people who had gone to DC, to New York. And looking at this bill 242-38, it needed that wisdom. It needed the wisdom of Robert Underwood. It definitely needed the experiences of Hope Cristobal, BJ Cruz. It needed the wisdom of Jill Benavente, who participated in sit-ins and campouts in Adelup for Chamorro land rights. It needed the relatives of Angel Santos, who blocked access to federal facilities in the name of Chamorro rights. Even if Parkinson wants to be a part of this, and that's good, move this ahead, but it still needs that grounded wisdom for it to be there. And Parkinson has said that he's willing to work with people, but it's always better to listen to people before you submit the bill. It's always nicer to have that be a part of it early on, in my opinion. And so, Ali, I want to give you a chance now to kind of share some of your thoughts.
Yeah, I definitely had the same idea that you did because I was always wondering like who did he talk to when he submitted this? Because really those are the people, all the ones you mentioned at the march, they're the ones who have been fighting this for so long. Um, Going to the town halls, one of the things that I realized, and as I talked about this more with my family, is that I think young people, at least around my age, I'm 22, we don't give the older generations enough credit. Um, like, and I say that in this sense because when we talk about self-determination, it always spirals into which of the three options that we're given, right? And then everybody likes to use it as a, oh, you don't think you're ready for independence. But really, the whole idea that we should be focusing on first is that we need our voices heard. Um, what matters is that the native inhabitants' voices are heard. It doesn't, uh, while we all have our own stance on what we want to become and what relationship we'd like to have with the US, I think we should put that aside when we should all look at each other and be like, I think you deserve to have a say in what happens to you. Um, just to put it out there, I'm pro-independence. I'm on this podcast. But I say that to say when we have difficult discussions, and to tie back to the beginning, when we have difficult discussions about self-determination with the older generations, I think we need to give them more credit because they saw all of it. They saw how this movement has progressed, and maybe if it's hard to have that conversation because, you know, we're given questions like, are we ready for this? Do you really think you can do this? It's because they've seen how it's been shot down. Maybe some of that morale has been lost because of so many challenges put forth by the US. To go further than that, I think as a community, like when we talk about self-determination, it's also on us to be able to educate ourselves on what it means. Everyone on Guahan um, who lives here has a responsibility to do that. Know what you're talking about and understand what it is, the three options, and understand why that the native inhabitants insist on having their voices heard because they were the ones who were colonized. I say they, but you know, um, one of the things too that we discussed in regards to the native, and if you'd like me to clarify any of these thoughts, sorry, I'm just jumping around in my brain. But one of the things too that I think is related is that when we talk about who gets to vote, there's going to be a lot of Chamorros who are excluded. I mean, Elise talked about the Chamorro only rhetoric, which is so true. It's not just Chamorros, but then I don't think other people realize how many Chamorros in the diaspora won't get to vote because they're not here. And it's what we need to realize is that it's not about which of the three options you want, and it's not about you know, what you identify as, because really what this is, it's a very time and location specific issue. Um, and so I think if we can like put aside all of those like differences and really see what we're talking or really focus on that idea, we may be able to come together. But of course, you know, there's always going to be challenges posed by the US. Um, oh, and one more thing, I think with this bill, it was talking about registered voters. And I brought up earlier like that third party idea, and Elise also brought up the registry. I think with this bill being limited to registered voters and the amount, if I'm not mistaken, the amount of registered voters is not reflective of the population of Guahan at all. And what that made me think of first was how many of like our disenfranchised like peoples have connection to that 1950s Organic Act. They're veterans who have who have deep roots here, who have suffered due to symptoms of colonialism or are experiencing suffering from symptoms of colonialism. We need to take that into account too. You can't just, I feel like even to be a registered voter, it kind of it becomes a class thing too in a way. Uh, and yeah, an access thing. You have to be able to take off work. You have to have all your documents together. I don't think this bill is very helpful in getting a like the true voice of those native inhabitants. Yeah.
Oh, Sedus Masi. Sedus Masi. And this is, you all bring up an important point because in the past, and I mean, when a decolonization plebiscite, a Chamorro sort of plebiscite was first envisioned, you know, the idea of people voting in the diaspora, you know, the Chamorro diaspora was smaller then, and there was no Tsetlu festival. There was no Marianas festival. There were Guam clubs, but there was not as many, it was not as pronounced. There was significantly less merch. There was significantly less Chamorro merch out there. And so now the Chamorro diaspora is larger. It is much more engaged. And when we look old and young, there is an interest in becoming engaged, getting connected, and so on. And so, this does bring up a point, because Ali brought up the idea of a plebiscite not being undertaken by the government, but happening by a nonprofit or an NGO. And so this was something that was brought up in the Commission on Decolonization as basically, because if the government cannot do it because of it's unconstitutional, and that can a NGO, can a nonprofit, like the Harao School or the Young Men's League of Guam, a Chamorro focused nonprofit, or even just a community group, it doesn't have to be a legal nonprofit, can some coalition just take on this task of finding out what the Chamorro people feel and then reporting on it? And if that's the case, then it creates new possibilities for opening up who can participate, not just in Guam, but also then in the diaspora. And so I wanted to hear your thoughts on that, because going back to Underwood and his generation who were here, their rationale was this idea that if you had left island, then you had voted. Your vote was to leave island. But life is not that, identity and life is not that simple. And that we know that there are ways that you can connect, protect, invest in the homeland, invest in your people, even if you are away. And so I want to hear, especially from Elise and Brianna, for those of you sa Sumasaga, Hamzugi Sanlago, and Manyasaga Imagainen at Samurutagi Sanlago, most Chamorros are out there. So what are your thoughts on that idea of attempting to have attempting to open it up to the Chamorro community globally?
Yes, I have a lot of thoughts on that. And I think it's also really interesting, you mentioned how we cast our vote, we made our choice. And I think that's interesting because I don't recall ever making a choice for living here in Ohio. My grandmother left Guahan with her children, my mother and her siblings, some time ago, and I had no choice being born in Cleveland, Ohio. All I know is that it's over $2,000 to fly back home. And so I don't honestly feel as though personally I had any choice in the matter, because I likely would have made a very different choice for myself. And so, I do want to kind of circle back in a moment to my personal opinions on more of like a global vote. But it was sort of proposed just a moment ago of like, well, if the government can't do it, then maybe a nonprofit, an NGO could do it. And I continue to sort of come back to these ideas of like operating and continuing to operate within this like square box that colonization puts us in. And, I believe that massive political change nationally and globally can happen. And so I do feel as though we as an indigenous people, as a sovereign people, from my perspective, like should continue to push and educate our people on understanding these, historic this historic legislation, like various court cases that have happened over time, and how our people got to where they are, and the history of colonization, because we'll begin to sort of break down the walls and sort of see behind the wallpaper of like what's really happened. And while, it feels as though our efforts are maybe best suited, like trying to navigate and figure out how we can make this happen, it's like we still are reduced to a racial category box. And, people, this bill was presented to allege that it's discriminatory for the Native inhabitants, the Native Chamorro people, to be able to participate in this plebiscite and not be open to all inhabitants, which would, state that, Chamorro people are reduced to a race category, which, I advocate that the Chamorro people are a political sovereign people and therefore are completely outside of this sort of DEI box that we can be lumped into, and therefore that sets its own precedent, I believe. And so, I feel from my perspective that it's critical to continue, in my own journey, in my own, using my own voice to like push for these larger political paradigm shifts, and educate our community on like, how did we get here and how can we actually create these massive movements that can, sustain our people and allow our people this path towards decolonization that involves our voices being prioritized and us getting to have a collective voice on the future political status of our home, that isn't opened up to all inhabitants, because, I'd imagine the Chamorro population on Guam is, from what I've researched, less than what it was formerly, back when Guam versus Davis happened. And so, by that, we will already be a minority vote in, opening it up to all of the population anyway. And so this, in my opinion, bill sort of just sets that precedent to suppress our voices even further. My personal opinion is I do believe that the vote should be, the plebiscite should be open to those of us living in the diaspora, those of us that do meet those credentials, or even possibly credentials of a registry that dates even further back than that, and that we as Chamorro people who are a political people who should have political sovereignty over our homeland, and who have ancestral ties and are descendants of those from our homelands should be able to determine the future status of our land.
No, Sedus Masi. No, Sedus Masi. I think it could be powerful to sort of reimagine the plebiscite. There have been, the plebiscite has been kind of stuck in a certain format for a while, but there's opportunities to reimagine it. One of the things that, obviously I think all of us disagree with is the idea of just opening up to anybody, the idea that somebody who moves to Guam and has been here for 30 days should be able to participate as somebody who's been here for millennia and their family. Like, that doesn't make sense. But because this is, I think, this is one of the hardest things that I think people don't understand, and this is particularly difficult within the context of the United States. And even Julian Uggan struggled to make the case to the federal court, because the federal court isn't, the United States courts government is not used to this thing. They don't know plebiscites and in the like decolonization plebiscites. They happen in Puerto Rico. They sometimes happen in other territories, and they pretty much ignore them. And so what does it matter? Like, you don't really have to deal with them. And so it's easier just to kind of make excuses to not deal with them. And so, but at the fundamental level, voting for your elected officials is one thing. Voting in a cause of justice is another. If you conflate them, like, I don't know if you shouldn't even be allowed to shoo flies away at the fiesta. Like, you should not even be allowed to do that. You should not be allowed to put up the pala pala tents. You should go and get the scissors and cut the grass. That's what you should do, because maybe you can do that. And so, because if you think those two things are the same, or they should be the same, and they should be judged using the same laws, but that's exactly what happens in the United States, is that laws and decisions for franchise, voting for your mayors, your congresspeople, those things get used to judge people voting for their rights to self-determination, their decolonization, and so on. And so that's why reimagining it even just thinking, Brianna, hearing what you were talking about there and just thinking about how it could really galvanize and energize the diaspora this could be something that would be truly powerful. Imagine if Chileng Bomba was somebody who went around the Chamorro diaspora 40 plus years ago collecting war survivor stories. And it was something that galvanized the Chamorro community then. Imagine if something like this happened, if the vote went to a nonprofit or a coalition, and there was this time where the voting happened in Chamorro Chamorro concentrated areas where you come and you gather and you vote, you talk, you share what you want for the future, and then your votes get collected. And powerful. I mean, I'm getting chills. I'm getting chills. Elise, I want to give you a chance, and we're going to go a little bit over an hour because I want to give everyone more time to share. And I've talked more than everyone else because I have a beard, I have a PhD, and I'm a light-skinned Chamorro man. I talk a lot, dispensed. So, okay, Elise, por favor.
Is this Masi? Sorry, Dispensa, is it Brianna or is it Brianna? I just want to make sure I'm pronouncing your name
It's
correctly.
okay. No, it's Brianna.
Brianna. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, no, Senor. I heard two different things, so I wasn't sure, and I wanted to clarify.
okay.
So thank you for that. So gosh, so many things to cover in like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever. So first and foremost, I absolutely think that people in the diaspora should have a say on their island, especially because I know that many of us do have intent to move back there. And perhaps we're just in some certain financial situations or whatever it may be that's preventing us from moving back there. And you kind of bring up this idea of, Brianna, about we didn't have a choice. I did have a choice. I made the choice to move out here, but I did so not knowing what was at stake, And so now if with this bill happening, who knows what the parameters are going to be. Might be like you need to have been a resident of Guam for 5 years and a registered voter for 5 years. And now I'm like, well, shoot, I better move home tomorrow so that I can be there to represent my people and to make a vote for our self-determination. And we think about choice, right? Did we have a choice? And we're talking this idea of, well, let's participate in America's democratic system. Well, we didn't sign up. We didn't have the choice, really. We as a community, we as Chamorros did not consciously make the choice to be a part of America in the sense that, of course, the first time we were sold, right? Or we were acquired during the Spanish-American War. We didn't have a choice there. And then the second time, the Organic Act part, I mean, our families were in dire situations after war. Of course, it's going to seem like a beneficial route to become part of America after experiencing all that war trauma. And so, Ali, you were talking about, we need to talk to our Manamku and really respect our Manamku. That's a huge part of the conversation. But also, it really depends on which Manamku you speak to. Because there's absolutely Manamku who feel very strongly and have so much loyalty to the military, to the US because of the way that they came and liberated the island from Japan. And so again, this whole idea of war, and this is another big thing that I'm like, gosh, the war just happened. Like, we talk about, what is it now? Like 80, what is it? I don't even, 81 years, right? 82 now. I think we're going on 82 or something like that. But anyway, it just happened. In the grand scheme of things, that's a small amount of time for us to heal. In fact, our people are the ones that are the most impacted by it. I learned recently that when it comes to the homeless population on Guam, most of them are Chamorro. Most of the people that are suffering on the island are our own island, our own people. Can you imagine that, being houseless on your own land? That's so heartbreaking. And beyond that, the unfortunate tension between the Mariana Islands. It exists because of war trauma. And that's another thing that we have to discuss because of things that happen during that time, right? And for us to come together and heal as a community, it's gonna take time. And I feel like we're just being pushed to make a decision, make a decision. You know, what are we? We haven't even had a chance to process what happened to our people. We haven't been given the opportunity to even think about how this war trauma has even arose in our own lives, in our own selves, much less the ability to talk to one another about it, much less the opportunity to talk to our neighboring islands about it. And so I think that when it comes to that aspect is that, you know, you can say that we're dragging our feet, but we haven't yet had the opportunity to heal from what it is that is causing so much, separation between our people. And again, all of this war trauma is causing our people to leave the islands because they cannot afford to live there or because there are more opportunities for their families. And you know, I made the decision back then. My parents made the decision to teach me English. They didn't teach me tomorrow. But I can't say that the circumstances of those times, during those times, that if I was there and capable of making the same decision, I can't say that I would have made a different decision with those circumstances. But the thing now is that circumstances are changing. We're becoming more aware and we're becoming more wise around this situation. We're not in a dire, war-like kind of era, and in the sense that, it was back then. I think there's a lot of conflict going on that, of course, we have to consider. But now we are much more able to advocate for ourselves and to think for ourselves about what this decision could mean for the future generations. I think that has to be a really big thing that you were talking about as well. So thank you for bringing up the idea of like the people in the diaspora being completely removed from the vote, because I think that would really scare a lot of people. And yeah, so I think that's what I'd like to say to wrap up my thoughts there.
No. Sidus Masi. Sidus Masi. And we are out of time, but I want to give powerful thoughts. Sidus Masi put mo. I want to give each of you just a chance to share. You've had a bunch of comments from people sharing some people have shared, that they feel like everybody, let everyone vote on political status. Some people have shared, we want sovereignty, we want to move ahead, just let everyone vote if that gets us there faster. Some have been supportive, saying, this is our right, we need to protect it. And then there was a lot of support, a few comments for of course, the idea of the diaspora, letting the diaspora be involved, because they have their own opinions, their own dreams, their own hopes, and so they shouldn't be sort of denied. And so, as we close this episode, I want to give each of you just a chance to share a closing kind of message or some final thoughts, and it could be just thinking with what would you say to somebody who does not support your position? Like, whether it could be somebody who doesn't think that the diaspora should be involved, or somebody who thinks that the vote should be open to everyone, or somebody who doesn't think that Chamorro self-determination is important, or what would you just say to kind of because I think that this conversation was very important, talking about some of these issues that need to be talked about. And so, if you had something to share, especially with somebody who may be on the other side, not fully on the other side, but maybe a little bit on the other side of one of these issues, what might you share your perspective about why you believe something that you believe on one of these issues? And everyone is looking away from me right now. It's like I'm back at UOG. It's like, okay, Hadzi Finetna, whoosh. Guagualiik, there's a gecko on the ceiling. Senor, you see that gecko? All right, and so Ali, I'm tempted to go to you first. And so, do you have something to share? You don't have to do what I said. You can just share something else.
I think right now we're in a time where people kind of have to care about self-determination, or like if they don't care, they have to look at it. So what I think I want to say is that everyone has a role, whether you just moved here, uh, even if you support self-determination for the native inhabitants, you need to say that. You need to be out there and you need to show that this isn't just like the underdogs fighting for themselves. Like it shows that the whole community understands that they play a role in it. So I'd say if you aren't a native inhabitant, learn about it and speak up. Whatever side of the fence you are, speak up. Because there's a voice and there's a community. And for the people who live here, it's very, and especially speaking to people my age, it is very easy to get caught up on what is happening to people, yeah, who live here. Because it's a very specific message. It's very easy to get caught up in what happens, on the phone and like internationally because we're in a really like turbulent time. But you can make active change here. And that starts with self-determination. That if you live here, self-determination will determine or can determine what our relationship remains like with the US. And so, whether or not you're Chamorro doesn't matter. Like, speak up because we all have a role. And, even if the US doesn't listen, I know our legislature listens. I mean, look at Fadian, the bill that happened there. Look at deep sea mining. We as a community came out for those two bills, and I think it was one of the recent times where I was like, wow, like our voice actually does matter. And so there's evidence that what we do here matters. And so just get involved.
Si Zeus Masi, si Zeus Masi. Who wants to go next? And then the one that doesn't go next goes last. Hungen, okay. Brianna, Hungen, this too. Okay.
Sure.
All right. Put football.
I'm Chamorro. I care deeply about our people. I care about our land, and I understand so deeply at the most cellular level that we are nothing without our island, and we are nothing without our land and our water. And it is our responsibility as Chamorro people to speak up and to stand up, because there will always be those who try to erase our presence, who question our right to belong, to be here, to continue to reduce us to check boxes in an ever-changing DEI equation. But we are not check boxes, and we are not here by permission. We are here by birthright. Our ancestors did not endure everything that they experienced so that we would roll over, so that we might ask to belong. We are already here. And as a Chamorro woman living in the diaspora, to my fellow relatives living in the diaspora, like, we need to stand up to those that are on the island. Like, show up on the 18th, show up and have your voices heard. Please, for those of us that feel powerless and who believe so inherently deep in our bones that this world is possible, please show up and please make your voices heard. And because whether you're Chamorro or not, collectively, this movement is global, and we can change the trajectory of the world together, the future of our people together, the future of our home together, with our voices at the epicenter of it. So, Si Zeus Masi, thank you.
Biba. Woo. Forte sinangan mo. Forte sinangan mo.
Girl, Viva!
All right, Ili. Hago utimo. And you already shared something powerful, but what will
Yeah, I'll keep it, a lot shorter this time, because I think that those were both such beautiful thoughts to add to it. When it comes to this bill, when it comes to any type of legislation that's going to be positioned for our island, or that has any kind of impact on the Chamorro people and the Marianas, I think the question should be, who is benefiting from it? Who stands to benefit? And if the answer isn't the Chamorro people, then I think that that's where we need to use our voice and to speak up. And that would be the same question that, I hope people who are in opposition of Chamorro sovereignty and things like that are reflecting on themselves, right? Like, who is benefiting from this? Is it you who, like what benefit are you trying to gain from this yourself? And to be really real and honest about it. Because I think there are folks who say, again, like they could really feel like it's benefiting the Chamorro people, but at the core of it, it's self-serving, or it could be, for just money or for economic, their own business or whatever it might be. And so to think broadly, to think beyond yourself, to think about the people who came before, and to think about the next generations to come. And it would really be it would just be a real disappointment if we lost this ability to finally make a decision for ourselves after never having had one. So I love you, all of you, whoever you are, everyone out there, regardless of if you're Chamorro or non-Chamorro. I believe in the power of love and the power of heart. I believe in the power of compassion and care for our neighbors. And so think of us in the same way that we think of you on our islands, in the same way that we have welcomed you to our homes and to our fiestas and all of that. Think of us too, because we are the people of the Marianas.
Biba. Biba. Woohoo. And before we close, I just want to remind everyone that the public hearing is next Wednesday, February 18th at 9 a.m. at the Guam Legislature. And people are encouraged to come and attend. And you can always, I put a link on the live stream to the toolkit by the Commission on Decolonization, because you can submit testimony. You can be on Guam, you can be off island, but you can definitely submit testimony. And things that we talked about today, the Commission on you can mention things in the Commission on Decolonization in their toolkit. They have a lot of facts that you can also reference, but you can say something as simple as protect the rights of the Chamorro people. That is something that you can just put it out there and say something as what I like to tell people is that much has been taken from the Chamorro people. Please don't take anything else. That's it. Say something as simple and straightforward as that. Para hamzu na tres, si dus masi puri finaton midzu, za si dus masi puri bos midzu. Para estino bonito zentadum na conversación. Agradeci hamzu, za para hamlo ni wedzonu me ekungok